The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in this world. Welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, Scale Continuous Deployment to Production with DeployHub and CloudBees. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm the moderator for today's event, and I'd like to welcome you. We have a really great webinar on tap today with some hopefully useful information for everybody. But before we get started, I do want to make a few housekeeping announcements. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of today's presentation, you will have the opportunity to view it again. Give us about 24 hours or so, and you should be receiving a link to the webinar on demand. Also, we will be taking questions from the audience for today's webinar, so at any time during the presentation you have a question for either one of our speakers, please feel free to use the control panel and submit your questions. And we'll probably take about 15 minutes or so near the end of the presentation and go through the questions. And if we don't get to your question, please know that we'll have a record of all of the questions. So I'm sure these guys will be more than happy to address your questions offline. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and make the introductions. First of all, our speakers today are Tracy Reagan, who is CEO of OpenMake, and Brian Dawson, friend of DevOps.com, and DevOps evangelist at CloudBees. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank
you. And yes, I am a friend of DevOps.com. I love you guys.
Great, thanks. All right, Brian, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you. You can get started.
All right, great. Again, I would also like to say thanks to you guys for joining, and thank you, Tracy, for inviting me along to participate in this presentation. I want to start out first by kind of setting the stage for why we're having this conversation. And frankly, I'm going to use a statement that's pretty cliche, but is also pretty accurate. Software is eating the world. Right? Software is no longer simply something we pull off a disk and we install on a computer to accomplish some specific items via software, but rather software is visible and invisible in about practically everything we do today, or visible and invisible and involved in about practically everything we do today. So I happen to be in Boston. I happen to had to find a place to sit down and hold this webinar. I pulled out a generic hardware device with software installed on it, ran a search that pinged servers halfway across the country, which pulled government data that was collected from satellites and stored, and ultimately told me I had to walk 500 feet, turn to the left, turn right, and then sit down. And of course, at the same time, this connection that I'm speaking to you over, this platform that we're using, is all based on software. And in fact, the flight that got me from San Diego to Boston wouldn't have happened without the magic of software. So frankly, it's hard to find anything in our life today that is not directly touched by software. And I would argue that you really can't find anything other than a walk in the woods that is not at least indirectly touched by software. A great example of this concept of software eating the world is the company that we all know and many of us love, and it's Tesla, right? Tesla, yes, we call it a car or an automobile, and that's the market that it survives in. But in fact, some would say its differentiating factor is its software system. I would go a little farther and say that's not just its differentiating factor, that the Tesla itself is really just a vessel that happens to have wheels on it for housing software. It is a computer on wheels to a certain extent. If you guys haven't seen it or had the privilege of sitting in a Tesla and seeing that beautiful computer interface that's provided, an example of this that makes the Tesla an automobile akin to what we see with our iPhone is we now can continuously gather data from the Tesla, or Tesla can continuously gather data from its fleet out in the fields currently being driven by customers, collect that data, issue fixes and adjustments, and then deliver updates over the air to your automobile that are not only changing changing the way your stereo works or your entertainment system works, but they can completely change the nature of the vehicle beyond what you directly interact with. An example of this is, as you guys may be aware, a couple of years ago, Teslas were experiencing fires. There were some that were due to crashes and accidents, but there were a rash that they ultimately identified were due to the fact that objects were puncturing the undercarriage and ultimately puncturing the batteries, causing leakage and resulting in fires. Well, Tesla gathered data, did some qualitative as well as quantitative analysis on the situation, what was causing it, and they came up with a really so obvious solution that you wouldn't think of it. That's the fact that, you know what, I think what we can do to reduce the incidence of these fires is we could raise the ride height of the car by a small amount. So what did they do? They issued a software update that updated the suspension, lifted the ride height, and it reduced the incidence of fire, right? This is an example of a non-traditional industry or an industry that is not traditionally focused around software, using software to respond rapidly to real-world conditions and to actually save lives, and maybe less importantly or more importantly, or knowing who you're talking to, depending on who you're talking to, save the valuation of the company, right? So this resulted in saving lives and billions of dollars, and software was entirely at the heart of the ability to do this. If it had been a traditional vehicle, it would have been a massive recall, some vehicles missed, and there's no way that you could have addressed this incident as frequent. Another interesting thing about Tesla that relates to that ability to respond to those issues is the fact that, when I go out and I buy a car, we traditionally buy a car, especially say a luxury car that is in a comparable class to a Tesla. So I go out and buy a Lexus. As soon as I leave the lot, that vehicle depreciates. And for most cars, they continue to depreciate steadily over time as your ownership duration increases or its time in the field. Well, an interesting thing was discovered with Tesla, that because of its ability to use software to continuously update its cars and continuously add value, the depreciation of Teslas is at minimum lower, but there have been times in the lifespan of Tesla, because of software updates, that the car is actually appreciated, right? And this is an example, again, of software disrupting a market, changing the way that business is being done. And I'd also say that, this is a tangible example of the continuous world that we live in, right? Today's consumers have completely different expectations than the consumers of a decade ago. Our consumers are technologically savvy. They're used to having rapid innovation fast, and therefore they now expect, they're used to having innovation rapidly, and they now expect that innovation without compromise. So I want the latest features, but I also want it to be reliable, secure, easy to use, etc. So this imposes sort of a demand on companies of today, and again, not just software companies. Or if we talk in software, yes, we have consumer software companies, but we also have our IT organizations and enterprises that have to deliver an experience to the enterprise, their end users or their customers. Their customers now have those same expectations. You can't deliver me a box with software because you have to go to CDW to order a server, and then you have to go get a disk of the software and install it. Well, you know what? I'm just going to go out to Amazon. I'm going to go to the marketplace. I'm going to click a couple of buttons, and I have that application or system that I need up and running, and I can control it myself. So all of a sudden, you're going to see a migration of your customer base, say, to AWS instead of your internal IT services, right? So we live in a continuous world where there is a non-stop demand for IT. How do we address this? Well, one of the things that we have to think about is that we can demand to go fast. We can demand that our teams go faster to meet the needs of the market. But if we just simply try to go faster, it's likely that we haven't taken the steps that are necessary to remove friction. And if we combine speed with friction, i.e. not improving processes, removing impediments, etc., what we get is heat, right? And when we get heat, eventually we overheat, we explode or implode or simply burn up on entry, right? So some would say that the answer is to go faster to meet that demand, but you cannot just go faster. So what is the real answer? Well, the real answer is continuous delivery and automation, right? We need to implement processes that allow us to deliver faster while ensuring we're maintaining quality, reliability, and security, as well as ensuring that we're maintaining or increasing value for the end user. Now, to implement continuous delivery, especially in a way that it's repeatable and reliable, we need to support that with automation so that we can get from what I like to call concept to customer, or development to commit, build, test, stage, deploy, and then ultimately, and very importantly, out to production. Quickly, we can gather information from the field in a production environment and feed that back and iterate to increase the value that we're delivering. And if you question this, if we look at some recent data, it supports this idea that people need to move faster, and to move faster, they're looking to continuous delivery and automation. So as you'll see here, the market is transforming. 65% of software developers, managers, and executives that were surveyed on behalf of Perforce found or have reported that their organizations have started down the path to continuous delivery. And they started down this path for some of the benefits that we can assume based on what I've just covered, right? Faster time to market while having better quality of product. They believe it's going to give them competitive advantage, and that they're also going to ultimately increase customer satisfaction and reduce the cost of development. Some other interesting things to look at is if we look at last year's State of DevOps report, we find that CD and DevOps organizations are outperforming their competitors. We're finding that they're doing things like releasing faster with 2,500 plus shorter lead times. They're releasing more, so they have more frequent deployments, 200 times more frequent deployments. They're experiencing fewer issues with a 3-time lower change failure rate, and they're running 24 times, or they're recovering 24 times faster from failures. And again, it's great that we have shorter lead times. It's great that we're doing more frequent deployments. But like I said, customers want innovation and features, but they also want reliability. So we also need to be able to pair that with the removal of friction, i.e. we can validate that we are failing less. And when we do fail, which is inevitable, we're recovering faster. So let's take a quick moment to look at continuous delivery in context. Okay? Really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get from the left, upstream, what I like to call downstream, from the left, upstream, to the right, what I like to call downstream. We want to go from a concept that makes its way into a development environment, into a production or production-like environment, and ultimately deliver it to our customers in live production. And we want to do this in a way that we can get user feedback and we can make rapid changes in response to that feedback. So there's some component practices that need to be considered in following this. One is we need to take an agile approach. So an incremental approach to identifying, prioritizing, and coordinating our feature development so that we're right-sizing what we deliver. We can deliver it quickly with minimized risk. We can measure it and then rapidly respond. Next is continuous integration. Whereas we make these changes in these smaller units, we want to continuously integrate and validate to ensure that we haven't introduced errors. Then we move on to continuous delivery, which by definition is not continuously delivering software to a customer, but rather continuously delivering software to a production or production-like environment to ensure that your software is always release ready. And then that gets us to sort of the holy grail currently achieved by unicorns, but I think pursued by a number of companies, and that's continuous deployment. This is where we are continuously taking changes that we define and develop by our agile process through a fast validation with continuous integration, through continuous delivery so that we know that it is release ready, and then ultimately deploying it out to production. Now, it's important to note that this highlights continuous deployment, but even if you're not doing continuous deployment, which is not right for some customers or not necessary for some businesses and customers, what you are continuously delivering at some point will have to be deployed out to your end user. And this is what we're going to talk a bit about when we talk about how to use Jenkins and DeployHub together, and we cover what CloudBees and OpenMake can offer you to help you achieve this. So why do we mention Jenkins when we talk about continuous delivery? You know, or why am I on the guy from CloudBees, one of the major contributors to Jenkins? Well, because Jenkins has clearly established itself as the #1 automation platform, first for continuous integration, and then ultimately for continuous delivery, right? And this is how we position ourselves well for work with solutions like DeployHub to help you go that last mile from continuous delivery out to deployment or continuous deployment out to production. What Jenkins does is it automates your processes all the way from code commit into source control to ensure that they can build, to ensure that you can properly test functional and non-functional, can deploy to a stage environment, run additional acceptance testing, make sure it runs in a given environment, and then ultimately it can be deployed out to production. And we can do this in a way, or Jenkins can do this in a way that you can manage it via complex delivery pipelines or manage complex delivery processes via Jenkins pipeline. You can control delivery of not only your app, but also the configuration of the application and environment. And Jenkins has proven that it can do it in a way that it's robust, reliable, and available. So currently, Jenkins has over 1.7 million users. It has 1,300 plugins that cover every stage of delivery, from code commit to build and config to scan and test to release, and then ultimately to deploy. And DeployHub, as you may notice by looking at the graph on this slide, is one of the potentially important components of being able to finish out that release and deploy solution. So why is Jenkins so popular? Why do we have 1.7 million users? Well, it's extensible and easy to use. It's open source. Not only is it open source, so it's been designed so that you can understand what's going on and you can make your changes, but it's also been built based on a plugin architecture, right? That plugin architecture, as we've seen on the other graph, allows Jenkins to connect to all things. It allows Jenkins to connect to those core tools that you need to facilitate your software development delivery process. And when we look at the automation that Jenkins provides, along with its connectivity, it ends up being your key to be able to go fast in a reliable manner. So to drive this home, some stats from earlier this year, as Jenkins is now at 12 million jobs running a month. That's a 50% growth year over year. 1.7 million users. We estimate that that's actually extremely low. It's probably 3 million or plus people that are interacting with Jenkins directly or in a headless manner, and that's roughly 53% growth over year over year. So it's taking traction. Right now, before I talk a little bit more about what CloudBees can offer, I'd like to take a moment to execute a poll and ask you guys a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Charlene, were you going to take over here?
Oh yeah, I can go ahead, and you can see on the screen the poll has been pushed out, and what we're looking to find out is how does your organization use Jenkins today? So you can choose one of the following. You can choose continuous integration on some teams, continuous integration on most or all teams, continuous delivery on some teams, continuous delivery on most or all teams, or continuous delivery with production deployment. We'll give folks about 10 seconds or so to put in their answers, and then we'll close things out. But I do want to remind the audience also, if you have a question for Brian or for Tracy during this presentation, don't wait to get your question in. You can send it in at any time. Just use that control panel, and we'll take a look at the questions before the end of the webinar. Okay, let's go ahead and close out the poll and take a look at the results. And continuous integration on some teams is the big winner there. Brian, what do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of aligns with a slide that I'll cover shortly here. I think it aligns, and it really speaks to the reason why we're having this talk, right? Most organizations have been able to implement continuous delivery, continuous integration on some teams. 14% continuous delivery on sub teams, but only 7% on most or all teams. And a very low 4% have managed to implement continuous delivery with a production deployment as a part of or an extension of that process. So what I think you guys will stand to benefit from some of the further discussion that we have about scaling processes across teams and ultimately connecting your delivery to downstream. So I just want to validate with our organizers here. Can you see a slide that says CloudBees How We Help?
No, actually, I see the quick poll again. So
okay, let me just pause and reshare. Let's try this again. Let me know if you can see.
No, we still got the poll up.
Okay, we're gonna try.
I'll tell you what. Here, Brian, let me try something on my side, and then we'll see if it pops up. Okay.
All right.
All right. Hold on. No, that didn't work. Let's see. Deb, can you step in and maybe help close out the poll?
The poll is closed out, so otherwise the webinar will cancel. Brian should have presenter.
So I do have presenter, and I'm presenting. It tells me that I'm showing my screen right now, and I'm on a slide with guys in tuxedos. Let me try it. I'm going to just try to stop and restart. Bear with me, guys. Sorry for the difficulties. Okay. And we'll go back into slideshow mode. Okay, we are having technical difficulties. What I'm going to ask is Wayne, can you go ahead and make Tracy presenter, and Tracy can go ahead and drive from here?
Yep.
There we go.
And we were at the tuxedos.
Yeah, I think it's 22 or okay. 23. Yeah.
There you go, Brian. Just say go when you want me to advance forward. Brian, you still there?
Oh no, it looks like we may have lost Brian. Okay, well we are, let's see. While we're waiting for Brian to get back, Tracy, we could go ahead and you can do your part of the presentation, and then when Brian comes back.
We can finish with Brian.
Great, thanks.
Tracy,
so I'm just going to skip.
You can give Brian keyboard and mouse.
Oh, okay. Is he able to? Brian's ready to go? Okay, Brian, you have keyboard and mouse so you can control my screen.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, guys, the GoToMeeting client seemed to have experienced an error, but I am now here. And Tracy, I will, I'm just going to go ahead and Tracy, so we don't take any more people's time. I'm just going to go ahead and ask you to advance.
Okay.
So you can go ahead and advance, Tracy, and I'm just going to talk to you guys a bit about how CloudBees can help, right? When we talk about CD and we talk about continuous delivery, and especially continuous delivery with deployment to production on some or a few teams, where most of you guys answered, that is one thing. But when we talk about scaling that across the enterprise, you need things like support, security, manageability, and you need to be able to reliably, operationally scale your solution. These are the things that CloudBees helps with. If we can go to the next slide. So what I want to talk to you a bit about is CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise. So CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise, and we can go ahead and move to the next slide. The CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise is a continuous delivery platform that we've architected for the enterprise. So we've designed this platform so that it provides the automation that Jenkins naturally enables or inherently enables, but in a way that it meets the needs of organizations that need to do this at a large scale. We do this by adding scalability, manageability, and resiliency capabilities, and then building onto the cloud native architecture. Next slide, please. So, why do we do this? Well, because we've realized that there are challenges with existing CD solutions. Most continuous delivery solutions out there were designed as lightweight single server web applications, or they've been designed as the same thing, placed in public SaaS or cloud. And oftentimes, or what we see is someone take a single server and they load it up with a bunch of jobs, a bunch of responsibilities. So what we're introducing is distributed pipeline architecture, which is also a perfect complement to OpenMake capabilities. If we can go to the next slide, please. So if you look at CD in general, I think you guys will agree that CD enables speed. It allows teams to leverage their CD server and CD pipelines to continuously deliver a capability such as web. And there tends to be minimal business risk when you're on a single team. But if we go to the next slide and look at what happens as people start to go, your CD is awesome, Jenkins is awesome, let's adopt it, can I get on your system? Well, now you start to get multiple teams leveraging a single lightweight web application or a CD server to deliver critical functionality such as commercial off-the-source software, mobile apps, and that CD server becomes a single point of failure. So now instead of going faster, you're going slower than you initially were, and you have increased instability and business risk. But when we go to the next slide and we talk a bit and we review the CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise approach, what we do is we enable scale with isolated, dedicated, on-demand, containerized CD servers for each of your teams. So we can have a shared environment. We can quickly onboard and ramp up, but we do this in a way that it is isolated from risk introduced by other teams. And what we actually find through the data we've gotten from our customers is not only do we enable you to go fast and reduce instability, but because you're doing this in a shared environment where you're sharing permissions and best practices, you can move faster. Tracy, can we go to the next slide, please? So for CloudBees, just like to sort of, call you out that as an organization, we are the Jenkins experts. And what we seek to do with our solutions is help our customers continually deliver better software so it can fuel their business in this continuous world that we live in. We do this by providing the only securable, scalable, and supported solution based on the Jenkins platform. Ultimately, with CloudBees, we're enabling companies to deliver software at the speed of ideas to respond to today's market. And with this, we can go ahead and move forward and build out. And I just want to talk to you a bit about, in transitioning to Tracy, about what we see through years of experience as common paths to enterprise continuous delivery. First, organizations need to ensure that they're able to scale what we see sort of in quadrant one. They're define, plan, code, build, and integrate, such that they can do this reliably across teams, work groups, and enterprise. But then ultimately, you need to connect what we call quadrant one, your define, plan, code, build, and integrate, to quadrant two, where we're focusing on testing, releasing, deploying, and then ultimately operating. And with one more click, we'll see that when you're able to follow these paths, you ultimately can achieve enterprise CD. And this is why this conversation that we're having today is a perfect match between Jenkins and CloudBees and OpenMake and DeployHub. So with that, Tracy, I'd like to go ahead and hand it to you.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. So I believe we have another polling question. I'm going to skip that in the interest of time. We can do the last polling question at the end. So just a little bit about who OpenMake software is. We're a group of software engineers who build what we consider to be scalable, agile DevOps solutions with a focus on solving some of the problems around continuous delivery. Our goal is to be a real leader in the release automation space. And we're doing that by offering a continuous deployment solution that can support environments at scale, thousands of endpoints. We have an open source solution, which I hope all of you will go and download and take a look at, as well as an enterprise pro solution that addresses release management. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. So what we've learned over the course of some hard knocks over the years, watching companies change, adopt continuous integration, and begin to adopt continuous delivery, is that the software deployments can be complex. Most of them are complex. Most of them go beyond a single WAR or EAR file. Most of them have database updates. They have changes sometimes in the infrastructure. And all of this has to be managed and coordinated together. So what occurs is what we're seeing is that oftentimes critical software updates are not getting all the way out to production. Sometimes they make it out to test, but they're not making it at the speed of Agile. So traditional deployment approaches aren't necessarily meeting the need for speed and control that Agile is driving, which creates what we could call the Agile bottleneck. So what we see often is companies who have really adopted continuous integration. They have a very solid development process whereby they're doing CI on a regular basis, continuous build. They might be driving that over to continuous test. And this is where we see most companies working right now, where they're really pushing the continuous test. What is common across all three environments? And you might have more in your environment. You might have all kinds of crazy names. I've seen things called the hog, the pig. But basically, you have a development environment, a test, and a production environment. What's common is the ability to get the code out to the endpoints as quick as possible in a consistent manner. When it doesn't, what occurs is production tends to be a bit risk averse. They have their own way of doing production releases. They may use their own types of job schedulers, and they might even take the developer scripts and tweak them so that they work in production. What we also see is sometimes there's a release engineer that sits across this process, and that release engineer is responsible in some cases to get it out to test and to get it out to production. They may or may not be on the Agile team. They should be part of the Agile team, but what's happening is those release engineers are supporting multiple application teams. In the days of waterfall, teams were able to do a release once a quarter, and that was huge. Release engineers and production teams and testing teams, they were able to keep up with that pace without any problem. While development has scaled up, testing and production hasn't scaled up, the humans able to support and sustain an agile cadence. So what occurs is there's a lot of staging that goes on. Even if this continuous delivery pipeline is rocking it all the way to test, we see oftentimes the same waterfall approach in production, and it goes into a staging area. What we don't want is to see companies spend a lot of money on adopting Agile, building out these continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines, and having production still stay a waterfall approach. So we need production to be lean. So DeployHub addresses that problem specifically. It was designed around Agile. It was designed to think about how Agile works. And that has everything to do with about how to adapt across environments and the ability to get your code up to your test and production environments at the speed of Agile. So let's think of a better way of doing things. Instead of having that staging area, you have your development, your test, and your production environments, standardizing on how deployments are done in a way that is auditable, traceable, and it can be shared. What also needs to occur in this model is that the production environment and the test environment, they have to be part of the development conversation. They have to be able to have some way of collaborating back to development because of production changes or testing changes, a new version of some runtime component or an Oracle or a change in the production environment could actually impact development. So everybody's connected, no man is an island. And in our Agile practice, our goal is to have everybody in the conversation as early in the process as possible. So DeployHub does two things. It manages the deployment process all the way down to managing releases. And the second thing it does is it brings production and test and development into a conversation about how those production or those application releases are to be managed. Some examples for you. Some of our customers here, the one we love the best is Harlan Clark had told us that their deployments were taking about 7 hours, which was a sustainability issue for their centralized release teams. Deploy had got their deployments down to about 5 minutes. Textron and USAA, they love model-driven processes. They've gone from literally thousands of scripts to a handful of reusable modules that they can share across the dev, test, and production environments for similar teams that build and deploy their software in a consistent way. So if we think about how we work with CloudBees and Jenkins, Jenkins, we're called by the Jenkins orchestration engine. We have plugins to Jenkins that we report back and forth about the build. But at the first level, what occurs is that the developers build their application package, and those application packages can have fairly complex workflows. And when I say the word workflow, I'm using the lowercase w, the installation workflow, not the big W, what Jenkins would normally orchestrate. So developers have the most knowledge about how to build their software installation, what components are required, even down to the infrastructure layer components. Now, DeployHub integrates with products like Ansible. We love it because Ansible is agentless, DeployHub is agentless, so they work quite well together. When you bring in Ansible, you can actually add the Ansible components. If you want to stand up a Tomcat server or a WebSphere server, you can use Ansible's Galaxy roles to do that and include that in your application package. At the big W, CloudBees and Jenkins basically drives that automation forward. The CloudBees distributed pipeline architecture allows that push process to occur so that once you've got something that's successful, it can be pushed across. Now, in the test and production environments, those team members are going to manage their own environments. They manage what their production environment looks like and their testing environments look like. And DeployHub goes ahead and does the updates to the endpoints. Once it does those updates to the endpoints, it generates a feedback loop that includes information from your Jenkins build all the way back to your commits and your user stories. So you can build out a fairly complex DevOps tool chain with it for your continuous delivery pipeline with open source. And I want to talk about some of the dysfunction in the market on this screen. For most developers, they reach out first to open source tools or low-cost tools such as Jira. When it comes to continuous deployment, a single application team has trouble getting their hands on application release automation. These tools are extremely expensive and in my opinion, way overpriced. There is no reason for continuous deployment to cost so much. In most cases, the cost is associated to the management of in-target agents. So our competitors will charge you based on the number of endpoint agents your production environment uses when it's at maximum capacity. So if you're a retailer and you're maxing out servers during Christmas, that's what you're going to pay for. We don't believe that that will ever solve the problems for continuous deployment, because developers are the ones who need to get their hands on ARA or a continuous deployment solution, get the application package built, and share that across the pipeline so that testing teams and production teams can consume it. If the developers are left to purchasing a continuous deployment solution, they're faced with having to make a recommendation for the entire organization. It's a huge dysfunctional piece of this continuous delivery pipeline, and why I would guess that we, in our earlier polls, we only had 4% of you able to get to production. We're solving that problem. We're disrupting the market, not only from an access point of view, but from a ability to get your hands on this from the pro all the way to the cost of the upgrade. So you can download DeployHub and you can begin doing continuous deployment at as early as development, be able to easily give that application package over to test and to prod with the open source version. You can layer on top of that the distributed pipeline architecture that CloudBees offers to secure it, or you can upgrade the open source to our pro version, which includes security around the environments, as well as the ability to manage release trains. And that starts as low as $6,000 for 10 applications or 10 teams per year subscription basis. In August, we'll have a hosted version for that, which is going to even further simplify getting your hands on a continuous deployment solution. That hosted version would be $25 a month if you're using the open source, because it's supported, and $80 per month if you're using the pro version. So what OpenMake software saw in the market was a huge need for developers to be able to provide and build out a consistent deployment piece outside of scripting, one that the production teams could feel comfortable about and have the transparency that they needed and have the controls that they want. We saw that our competitors were charging way too much, and that's why that we're not, as a community, successful in continuous deployment. So we're solving that problem. Now, if you take a look at our competitors, I'm just going to give you a few of our competitive differences. DeployHub, the open source version, is agentless. Like some of its competitors, it has a graphical blueprint a designer that allows you to define what your application package looks like with these blueprints, and reusable workflow components, workflow with the little w for just doing your software installation. It also allows you to call your existing scripts. If you're already built out quite a bit of work, you can actually include those scripts into this workflow designer. I talked about collaboration. I can't express how important it is to allow your production teams and your testing teams to become part of the Agile conversation. With these teams being sort of siloed, it makes it more difficult for the developers to grab them and bring them into a meeting or to have them attend daily stand-ups. It doesn't always happen. So DeployHub solves that problem by allowing testing and production and data center teams and even DBAs to have visibility into what the development teams are doing. It also does something which was one of my favorite parts of the tool, coming from the configuration management and application lifecycle space. It does what we call version jumping. Now, we all know what a version control tool does. We all understand what GitHub does, or Git, or Subversion, or ClearCase. It creates incremental changes in software updates and code updates. What DeployHub does is something similar in what we call built-in deployment version control, which allows you to jump between any two versions. So for example, if development's at version 10 and testing's at version 5 and production's at version 2, and now you want production to get all the way up to version 10, you don't have to do a monolithic update from version 2 up to version 10. DeployHub understands all of the incremental changes, including anything that you've changed in your database updates, in your configuration, in your IT stack configuration, Cisco router changes because it doesn't require agents. It creates all of that in the application package, tracks the changes, and applies those updates incrementally. You can also do the same thing backwards. So if you want to jump versions backwards, you can. So our competitors will talk about roll forward and roll back, which we do. You can roll forward to a release, and you can roll back a release. We amped that up by adding the version control and the ability to version jump, because what we perceived in the Agile space is that developers drink from a fire hose, testing drinks from a garden hose, and production wants to sip from a straw. So if that's the world we live in, we've made it easy for production to go ahead and make those jumps if they're sipping from a straw. As I said, Ansible and Jenkins integrations included in the open source version. When you bring up a DeployHub, it sucks in about 4,000 different Ansible Galaxy roles, so you can easily jumpstart your process. Now in Pro, the Pro version adds some security. It adds what we call domains, and it also adds a smart calendar. And the smart calendar allows testing and production teams to block out sections of time so that you, as an Agile developer, can push your deployments through the continuous delivery pipeline, excuse me, without having to wait for an approval. Because what happens is the calendar they can just do a lookup on the calendar and say the calendar is either open for business, that means it's okay to go, or it's closed for business, meaning it's not okay to go. So if you want to streamline some of the continuous delivery process, you can do that with our smart calendars. And each group, testing, production, they own those environments. So they get to modify those calendars as they see fit without having to go back and talk to the developer about it. You can also reserve a deployment event. So if you're a development team and you really needed to go out on a certain day, you can reserve that, and that's one of the ways you can collaborate. And then the continuous feedback loop sort of sums it all up, pulls it all together, and shows exactly where your JIRA change request, where it was, what commit it was associated to, what build it was added to, all the way down to what server it actually ended up to on, what endpoint it's on, even if that endpoint's a container. Now in the open source version, you get everything from the build forward. In the Pro version, we add the things that come before the build. But if you're using the open source version, you can actually pull some of that other information from your Jenkins plugins so that you have that. So you're not required to use the Pro version to get that information if you're using Jenkins. Domains are specific to Pro. It adds, think about it as folders and group level security. But it also allows for a stronger self-service and secured environment. So with domains, developers can have their own environments. They can add users, they can add components, they can do anything that they want. And they can also share components with other teams. So domains create more of a sharing and folder structure. And the Pro version allows you to manage what we call a release train. So if you're a testing team and you've got 2 or 3 applications rolling out on the same day, going to the same end targets, you can manage that. So what I'd like to do is if we can do some of those polling questions, and then I'm going to bring Brian back on to talk about how you can get more information about trialing the CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise. And certainly you can get DeployHub, the Pro version. It's free to small teams. It includes 2 applications with unlimited deployments and unlimited users. And of course, you can get involved in the DeployHub OSS community by going to deployhub.org.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'll join back in after the call, after the polls, Tracy. Thank you.
So Charlene, yeah, I think you could open those last 2 polls.
Absolutely. We've got, I think we're going to do them out of order a little bit, but that's okay. We've got a poll question up on the screen right now. What best describes your belief about release automation? So you can select one of the following. It is too expensive for our team to acquire and implement. Only production teams can use a release automation solution. I don't worry about how test and production deploys code. Or release automation is not designed for developers. It's an operations tool. Okay, guys, we've going to give you guys about 10 more seconds to put in your questions, or sorry, to put in your poll answers. And then also, if you have a question for Brian or Tracy about any part of this presentation, go ahead and get it in now. We do have about 10 minutes before the top of the hour, so we should be able to get 2 or 3 questions in. All right, let's go ahead and close that poll and take a look at the results. Wow, it looks like it's too expensive to acquire and implement. Tracy,
this is exactly the problem that we saw in the market, and that is why we've brought to the community the open source version. So you don't have to believe that anymore. I would encourage you to really get your hands on it and play with it and become a contributor. There's a lot of opportunity here to really build out a full continuous delivery pipeline that can support deployment across all of the environments with the control and speed. Sort of going back to Brian's comment, we don't want to burn up in the deployment space. That's why ARA tools are out there, but it's ridiculous that they're so expensive.
Okay, great. Not sure if we want to go ahead and do the other poll. There it is. I guess we're going to do it. What best describes how your deployments are being performed? The developers write, deploy scripts that are modified for test and production. Development, test, and production manages deployments on their own way with a mix of deployment scripts and tools. Or we use an application release automation solution for continuous deployment from dev through production. Okay, guys. Let's see, we're about 30 seconds in, so we'll give you guys about 10 more seconds, and then we'll take a look at the poll results, and then we'll get to the questions. We've had a ton of really great questions come in so far, so I'm looking forward to that Q&A period. Okay, taking a look at the poll results. There we go. Looks like dev, test, production manages deployments with a mix of deployment scripts is the clear winner here. What do you think about that? Is that what you're seeing?
It's exactly what we see, and that's what causes that agile bottleneck, particularly as those scripts get forced up to production. Production teams generally want to do something different, or they take their time with implementing them, or it's just hard to manage it. This is all what ARA is for, but like I said, the dysfunction in the market is the developers who need to get their hands on it, and those tools are being sold at a CIO data center level without input from the development team. So we believe DeployHub can disrupt that and sort of fix that problem with its pro pricing and its open source availability.
All right, great,
so,
great. So
Brian, you want to talk about the trial of CloudBees?
Yes, Tracy. I just want to encourage you guys as you're looking for an affordable way to implement continuous delivery with application release automation as part of that process, and do that in a way that you ultimately know you can do it across all the other teams. Not only take a look at DeployHub Pro or DeployHub OSS, but go ahead and download CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise. There's a 14-day free trial. You could plug in DeployHub and evaluate it in that context to see if a combination of those features are what you need to hark back to something we said earlier, to achieve speed without friction. And you can find that just by going to cloudbees.com/start trials, or you can always email us at info@cloudbees.com.
Great. All right, as I said before, we've got a ton of questions that have come in, so I want to go ahead and get to a couple of them before the top of the hour.
Cool.
The first question is for you, Brian, although I'm sure Tracy can chime in as well. Guy or Yi is asking, I've always thought that continuous delivery means delivering from commit to production. you, as in you, Brian, add a continuous deployment step specific for production. Have I been wrong all along?
Well, I don't want to say that you've been wrong all along, but again, if you ask different people, you'll tend to get different answers. What I will refer back to is, I think, really the first mainstream introduction of continuous delivery to the public, which is Jez Humble's continuous delivery book. And in that, the distinction is made between ensuring software is ready for release and actually deploying to production. So it's that definition that I draw from. And I make this distinction because if you go in, say, to your operations team and you say, look, we have Jenkins, we want to implement continuous delivery, and we want to deploy, use DeployHub. If they think continuous delivery means you're constantly delivering every change into production, there may be some pushback. So it's important to sort of have a common idea of what those terms are. Now, just to close out real quick, continuous delivery can mean that you could do blue-green deployments and you could continuously sort of be delivering to a dark server, or you can do dark deployments, right? So you can continuously deliver to production. With continuous deployment, you're continuously deploying features to your customers. I hope that helps.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, I've got a question, I believe, for you, Tracy. How is asking regarding the rollback process. Is that an atomic process from end to end of a release, i.e. DB and web app, or both?
Yes, it is. It's end to end. But remember, unlike other tools that you may have looked at, we're looking at it from that incremental perspective. So if you roll back one, there's not going to be it's really not going to be, I wouldn't call it atomic, but if you jump, it's going to be.
Okay.
So we avoid the monolithic when we can.
All right, great. Another question for you is from Padnaba, and I know I just butchered that name and I apologize for that. How does DeployHub communicate with target app servers if there is no agent, if no agent exists? Is it via SSH? Yeah,
yes,
that's okay.
SSH.
Right.
Well, there's
Excellent.
actually you can choose, there's different protocols that you can choose and we set it up, but most people use SSH.
Okay. All right, great. Brian, I've got a question here for you from Yenwen, who asks, to scale to multiple enterprise masters, is it possible to have single sign-on capability across all the masters?
Yes, absolutely. That's actually a key feature provided that kind of goes under that manageability bullet. So when you deploy masters underneath CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise, CloudBees Jenkins Enterprise can manage the authentication and authorization of those masters, and it can do it in a manner in which it integrates with your external authentication system. Now, in terms of sort of true single sign-on, I've already been authenticated and I access that master, I'm logged in. There are ways to achieve that, leveraging our integration, but that's going to sort of depend on what your single sign-on service and setup is. So short answer is yes. And we'd be welcome to discussing it more if you want to follow up at info@cloudbees.com.
All right, great. Tracy, another.
And just on that topic, and keep in mind that DeployHub OSS can be driven by that. So you only have to have one location for that security control.
Okay, good point, good point. Okay, I think we have time for one more question for you, Tracy. Daniel asks, how does DeployHub manage database changes to production?
That's a really good question. So as part of when you define your application package, you define components. And let's use an easy example. We're going to update a column in a table. What you would do is you define a component for your database, and you would have it in that version. You would have that table change. You would use a SQL script to do that, and that SQL script would be associated to the little w, what I call the installation logic. And so that SQL script is there for updating and for going forward and for rolling back. So as it progresses across the environments, let's say development has one a database server, but testing has 5, and production has 10. When you define your environments, you define endpoints that are of a certain type. And when you define your components, you define them as a certain type. So what these ARA solutions do, and DeployHub, like its competitors, allows you to have an environment that can be elastic. And because of the tagging from component to server type, it will automatically say, okay, I'm gonna run this on every database server that I have defined to my environment. Now, when you define your application package, you do so with a rollback step. So you would have a SQL statement that actually took out that column for that particular version. And all of that's now is versioned as a big one package, and it's got a version number just like you would if it was source code. So basically, when DeployHub does these releases, it does these deployments, it basically checks that information out, and it understands how to apply it to the environment and the landscape. So it takes the blueprint and marries it to the landscape.
All right, great. Well, thanks for that answer, and thank you for everybody who did submit questions. Tracy and Brian, thank you both for joining me today on this webinar, and please, everybody, be sure to check devops.com for future webinars. But we are a couple minutes late, so I do want to thank everybody for joining me today, and I'm Charlene O'Hanlon signing off. Have a great day.
Thank you, Charlene.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.